In the 6th century, a violent and oppressive king ruled over the lands of North Wales. We're told that he took his throne with fire and swords, that he terrorised his own countrymen and regularly invaded his neighbours. We're told that he coveted his nephew's wife, but after being reminded of her vows to her husband and his vows to his own wife, he decided to accelerate the whole process of "till death do us part." We're told that he was powerful and malicious, generous yet sinful. He granted lands to several of his churches, yet featured as a glorified supervillain in several saints' biographies. It is fitting then that his reign was ultimately cut short by the deadliest warrior humanity has ever faced. You know his name, you've heard his stories. I'm talking about, of course, disease. This king, Maelgwn, nicknamed Dragon of the Island, ultimately met his match with a plague which had never been recorded before or since. The dragon was not slain by a hero, but was instead just another death to one of the most mysterious diseases in all of human history, one that apparently fell completely out of the historical record, leaving no clues, never to be seen again. This is the mystery of the missing plague. Medieval Wales was no stranger to disease. In the 6th century alone, we're told about 3 different afflictions in the country. One in 526, one in 537, which was shared across Britain and Ireland, and finally, the one we're interested in today, in 547. According to the biography of St. Taylor from the 12th or 13th century, this disease was known as Pestis Flava in Latin, the Yellow Plague, a name it apparently acquired by turning anyone affected with the disease yellow and bloodless. The author tells us that it appeared to the people of Wales as a column of watery cloud, with one end sweeping across the ground and the other stretching far into the sky, and that this disease-bearing cloud took the life of King Maelgwn and ravaged his kingdom. Another saint's biography echoes this description, likening it to a tornado, describing its victims as turning yellow and pallid, and calling this yellow plague by a different name entirely, a Dilead Melen, in Welsh meaning the yellow destruction. A 12th century author named Gerald was also aware of this disease, claiming that physicians called it isterus, Latin for jaundice. Finally, we come to a 13th century text known as the Annales Cambriae, and it's here we can find the specific reference to the death of King Maelgwn. According to the text, there was a great mortality in 547, which killed Maelgwn of Gwynedd, and then there was a yellow plague called Lallwelen in this source. This plague was also apparently the source for a contemporary phrase, Hir hin Maelgwn yn llys Ros, the long sleep of Maelgwn in his court at Ross, North Wales. I guess no one broke the news to this monk about what death was. So, as we've seen, in the 12th and 13th centuries, there are several references to a frightening pestilence that swept across Wales like a tornado 700 years prior, turning its victims yellow and pallid. Sources called it the Yellow Plague or the Yellow Destruction, and we're told that it ravaged the kingdom of Gwynedd and put an end to the tyrannical rule of their king. Straightforward. Simple. Except, did you notice that? In the Annales Cambriae, the wording is off. There was a great mortality which killed Maelgwn of Gwynedd, and then there was Lallwelen, the Yellow Plague. Weird. But that's okay. Perhaps this entry is just a bit corrupted. That certainly wouldn't be the first time, and luckily we have other copies of this manuscript. If we look at the oldest version, which could be from as early as the 9th century, we might find a more straightforward answer. And sure enough, this copy is far simpler, losing much of the detail found in the other entry. The mention of Britain is gone, the phrase about Maelgwn having a long sleep is gone, and the Yellow Plague, Lallwelen, is entirely absent. Nowhere to be found. What's going on here? We know that this plague was mentioned in the 12th century, and now it's absent in the 10th, so what else do we have from this time period? The closest we can get to Maelgwn's life is undoubtedly a text written in the 6th century by a very angry monk named Gildas. This man is the source for many of Maelgwn's terrible deeds, alongside a seemingly out-of-place description of his strong arms and tall stature. But while I may now dedicate my free time to writing Gildas and Maelgwn fanfiction, this monk actually wrote too early for our purpose today. Because in his text, Maelgwn is still alive, still with his strong arms, still sinning and bringing shame on the people of Wales, and as the ancient Welsh proverb goes, those who are still alive are not dead. so we'll have to move on. The Historia Britanum from the 9th century also mentions Maelgwn, but it doesn't seem to say how he died. And then, suddenly, we're brought back to the early 12th century, before Lallwelen was recorded in the Annals Cambriae, and it's here that we have a fascinating book, The History of the Kings of Britain. A book so frequently criticised for its inaccuracy that an author I mentioned earlier, Gerald, claimed that a man possessed by evil spirits suddenly wound up even more possessed when this book was placed upon him, and that the spirits infested the book too. Sadly, the author of this text seems to have only had a single source on Maelgwn, and that was the angry polemic written by Gildas. And yes, if you recall, this was written before Maelgwn died, so no plague is mentioned at all. Although a Welsh version of this text does add that Maelgwn died in a church near his castle in Dyganwy, North Wales. So it's rather quickly become apparent that the Yellow Plague is entirely absent from the older sources. Maelgwn is recorded as dying in a plague, but stories involving his demise to the Yellow Destruction only come about in the 12th and 13th centuries, and even then the sources can't seem to agree on whether Maelgwn died to this or not. The historian J. Kuehl, following all of this, noted that a convincing source for the origin of this Yellow Plague has yet to be found. He does, however, hypothesize that there could have been an older Welsh source that these writers got their information from, citing a potential clue in the fact that the Yellow Plague has numerous Welsh names, which are present even in texts that are otherwise written entirely in Latin. Is there now a lost source for which the author of the Annals Cambriae got his mention of Lallwelen from? Or that the author of the saints' biographies received the name Dilead Melen from? We don't know. On the surface, we have a pretty straightforward story that has existed since the 12th and 13th centuries. Maelgwn, the tyrant king of Gwynedd, died in 547 to a yellow plague that destroyed his kingdom. A one-off disease that was never recorded as occurring before or since. However, once we dig deeper, we discover something far more mysterious. That records of this disease are completely missing prior to the 12th century. Instead, the only mention of Maelgwn's death is found in an annal that never mentions a yellow plague at all. Where did this disease come from? Lallwelen, a Dilead Melen, or a Fad Felen? Or conversely, where did it go? Why did it disappear from the historical record? Or was it never there to begin with? Despite this uncertainty, some historians have gone as far as to attempt to diagnose Maelgwn's condition. Rather than dying from taking a long nap, they believe that they can pinpoint exactly what halted his reign, and perhaps provide us more clues on the exact nature of this historical enigma. To help figure this out, we have to look far to the east, beyond Europe, beyond Asia, all the way around the globe, to the island of Ireland. Medieval Ireland was no stranger to disease. In the 6th century alone, we have records of at least 5 different afflictions on the island, and some of these plagues have a very familiar name. Because while the Welsh never again recorded a case of the Yellow Plague, the Irish had their own version to deal with. In 534, the Annals of Boyle tell us of an outbreak of Buidhe Conail, the yellowness of Conail, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right because my guide is a text from 1947. In 537, we have the Great Plague that struck both Britain and Ireland. In 544, we'd have an outbreak of Blefed, the bubonic plague. And finally, in 550, the Annals of Tirnach tell us of an outbreak of the Yellow and Saffron plagues, the first of which struck several churches in southwest Ireland. The records of these plagues are incredibly valuable to us, and they can provide 2 key theories as to what the Welsh Yellow Plague was. The first is found in 544. By this time, the bubonic plague of Justinian had attacked the Roman Empire and reached the shores of Ireland. The historian A. Dooley has suggested that the Irish name for this, Blefed, means yellow disease, using an apparent old scholarly word for yellow. Dooley thereby theorizes that the 2 diseases are one single cycle of the plague of Justinian. There are 2 problems with this, however. The first is that the date in the Annals Cambriae seems a bit far away. If the plague had reached Ireland in 544, why did it take another 3 years to be recorded in North Wales? This date has been considered to be unreliable, however, so perhaps it could be pushed back a couple of years to line up more. What really disputes this theory, though, is pointed out by the historian J. Kuehl. Continental sources never describe this bubonic plague as yellow, nor do they list the key symptom of turning its victims yellow. Instead, two different authors record the primary symptom apparently being swelling of the groin. And yes, I am being serious. This is never mentioned in British or Irish sources relating to the Yellow Plague. To add to this, I have to point out that Blefed and Buidhe Conail are listed as two separate diseases in the Irish annals. In all, there doesn't seem to be enough evidence to confidently link the bubonic plague to the Yellow Plagues of Wales and Ireland. They seem to be two different diseases entirely. Thankfully, the historian Sir William MacArthur had a different theory. Growing up listening to the stories from the Great Famine, he was familiar with the diseases that followed, such as typhus, but one day he was apparently talking to an old man in Donegal who mentioned something groundbreaking. He told MacArthur that he remembers his parents mentioning another, different disease from the time, one that they called the yellow fever, because it turned its victim's skin yellow. And MacArthur believed he knew exactly what that disease was: relapsing fever. This disease is the cause behind our second theory on what exactly these yellow plagues were. Relapsing fever can cause jaundice and liver failure, both of which cause the skin to turn yellow, and in the 19th century there had been outbreaks in Ireland and Scotland, the latter of which caused its victims to suffer a very deep jaundice. Based on this, MacArthur believed that Buidhe Conail and Pestis Flava, this strange disease that struck Ireland, Wales and Ireland again, was a, quote, severe form of relapsing fever, noting that the symptom of jaundice must have been common enough to, quite literally, colour the chronicler's perception of the disease. In the centuries following its first appearance, the Yellow Plague of Wales would form a much more mythical picture, and with all of the confusion we've seen, it's really not that surprising. While the saints' lives claim that Maelgwn died of a Dilead Melen, and the annals claim that it was apparently in his court in North Wales, very likely near a town called Diganwy, we would soon receive a much more elaborate story. In the 17th century, two texts tell us that Maelgwn had fled the Yellow Plague, here called by its now most common name of Fad Felen, to the church of Eglwys Ross, near his court in Diganwy. Here, he underwent his own 6th century lockdown, posting guards and forbidding anyone to come near except for his attendants, and shutting the door to prevent the foul infected air from coming in. Maelgwn could not, however, have known how relapsing fever, Fad Felen, was spread. Plague is a scary enough concept in the modern day, where we have good sanitation and understanding of what disease is. Imagine how terrifying it would be if you had no idea what was causing it, and no cure, and if doctors would not even attempt to treat it, because according to the saints' lives, they would just end up infected themselves. Unfortunately for this medieval king, relapsing fever is not spread through the air, but instead by lice and ticks. So while he may have been safe from human transmission, he was not safe from the source. We're told that Maelgwn ultimately became infected in an odd way, by looking through a hole in the church door, allowing the foul air to strike him. His attendants apparently believed he was sleeping in his bed, so I'm guessing they thought everyone turned yellow and corpse-like when they slept, and that's where this classic phrase, "the long sleep in the court of Ross," comes from, which was apparently still used in the 17th century. The most monstrous transformation of a Fad Felen, however, would come from the mouths of the bards. In this case, a poem given to a bard named Taliesin from the 6th century. We have no proof he ever wrote this, of course, and in all likelihood he didn't. Until 1973, it wasn't even known if this was real, as it had only been preserved in a lengthy manuscript created by a man named Iolo Morgannwg, who had an unfortunate habit of inventing things like these. Fortunately, a historian named Gerallt Harries found this paragraph in a manuscript from 1527, and it said the following, if you'll pardon my accent. Y ddaw prif rifedd I forfa Rhianedd, y ddial enwiredd a Maelgwn Gwynedd, a'i flew a'i ddannedd a'i llygaid yn eirth, a hwn a una diwedd a Maelgwn Gwynedd. A most unusual creature will come from Morfa Rhianedd as a punishment for the wickedness of Maelgwn Gwynedd. Its hair and its eyes and its teeth will be gold, and it will destroy Maelgwn of Gwynedd. Morfa Rhianedd is a swamp located to the north of Maelgwn's castle in Diganwy, so thankfully by the 16th century they had clearly cracked the case. Fad Felen was not caused by foul air but by a foul beast instead. And yes, the author did rhyme Gwynedd with Gwynedd. Nice job, Taliesin. Oh, he can't hear me. The historian J. Wood also links this monster of Morfa Rhianedd with an 18th century folkloric creature named Gwach y Rhibyn, described by Wirt Sykes, the author of British Goblins, as an extremely thin, cadaverous woman who stalked the swamps and could cause fever or death just from her appearance. While it isn't an exact match to Fad Felen, Wood makes an extremely interesting comparison between the two. After all, Gwach y Rhibyn is associated with swamps, starvation, and death from disease, while relapsing fever can follow famines, and was once also imagined as a monster rising from the swamps. Fad Felen is one of the strangest and for a time most mysterious diseases of the medieval era. No one at the time knew the true cause of Maelgwn's demise. Until 1947, long after we understood the nature of what caused disease, historians generally assumed it was just the bubonic plague, an opinion that's still sometimes held today. But the dates have never lined up very well. The continental sources never mentioned anyone turning yellow, the Welsh and Irish ones never mentioned any bubonic swellings, and the Irish even called these diseases by two entirely different names. MacArthur's theory, born from the horrifying stories of the destruction Ireland faced in the 19th century, is our most robust theory. A particularly virulent outbreak of relapsing fever, whose jaundice-causing symptoms were so potent that it became the sole identifying factor across 2 islands and 2 languages. Kuehl also suggests that Fad Felen could have occurred close to or at the same time as other plagues, perhaps typhus, another famine-associated fever, or even a late cycle of the bubonic plague. All of this could easily contribute to a massive sense of confusion from later medieval chroniclers. While it's true we don't have any sources referencing the Yellow Plague in Wales until the 12th century, the variety of names it was known by suggests to Kuehl that there was an older source, perhaps several. After all, these sources called them by 2 different names, 3 if you include the Latin one, and by the 16th century a third name cropped up, Fad Felen. Where did this come from? Where did any of these come from? Kuehl ends his analysis with one final brilliant note, that after all of this, 20th century historians will claim that a yellow plague swept across 6th century Europe, despite the fact that we only have mentions of it in Ireland and Wales, and that those records are from hundreds of years later, and that we have no idea what their source is. He then cites one of these historians he's criticising directly, with the exact book and page number. I had to travel down to Cardiff to get access to this because, believe it or not, Wales and Medicine 1973 was not an international bestseller, but this made it absolutely worth it. I can only aspire to be this petty. In the end, we will probably never know for certain what Fad Felen was, nor where these Welsh sources got their information from. I was fired from my job as a doctor for making up diseases for my patients to have, so I suppose it's always a possibility. And I don't think it's my fault that liver exploditis doesn't exist. Fad Felen, Lallwelen, or a Dilead Melen was not remembered as an invisible disease, silently turning its victims yellow and bloodless, but instead as a destructive column of water, a tornado, and a literal monster rising out of a swamp. I do find this connection quite interesting though. Why did the monster come from Morfa Rhianedd? Is there perhaps some truth to the creature emerging from the swamps of North Wales, not in the form of a tangible being, but as something far more terrifying? Millions of tiny, invisible creatures, spreading a disease that at the time must have seemed like it had no cause, no cure, and no escape. Thank you for watching.